Have you ever felt mentally tired even before the day truly begins, as if your mind is already weighed down by thoughts? Even without heavy work, focus slips easily, small decisions feel demanding, and the exhaustion feels deeper than ordinary physical tiredness. In this audiobook, we will explore why your mind feels tired all the time, what quietly drains your mental energy, and how clarity can be rebuilt gently without pressure or force. Chapter 1. Understanding mental fatigue. Mental fatigue rarely arrives suddenly. Instead, it grows slowly while life continues as usual and responsibilities keep stacking one after another. You think, plan, react, and solve problems throughout the day, often without noticing how little mental rest you are actually getting. Even moments meant for relaxation are filled with background thinking. Over time, this constant mental activity begins to feel heavy rather than helpful. Unlike physical tiredness, mental exhaustion does not clearly signal when it needs recovery. It hides behind distraction, emotional dullness, and a subtle lack of motivation that is hard to explain. You may sit quietly, yet your thoughts continue moving from one concern to the next. This happens because the brain remains alert, even when the body tries to slow down. Your mind is not designed to carry endless unfinished thoughts at the same time. Every pending task, unresolved conversation, or future expectation stays open in the background. These open mental loops quietly consume attention and energy. Over time, this invisible load becomes one of the biggest causes of mental tiredness. Mental fatigue also grows when the mind stays in anticipation mode for too long. You replay past moments, imagine future problems, and prepare responses for situations that may never happen. This constant readiness keeps the nervous system tense. In this state, real mental recovery becomes difficult. Many people misunderstand this exhaustion and label it as laziness or lack of discipline. In reality, the mind is simply overworked and under-rested. When mental energy drops, even familiar tasks feel emotionally heavy. Enjoyment fades not because you changed, but because your mind is tired. Emotional pressure plays a powerful role in long-term mental fatigue. Stress and frustration that are repeatedly ignored do not disappear. They remain stored quietly in the mind. Over time, this emotional weight adds to the feeling of constant exhaustion. This is why mental tiredness often feels persistent. Even calm days can feel foggy or slow without a clear reason. The exhaustion reflects accumulated mental load. It is rarely caused by the present moment alone. Understanding mental fatigue is not about fixing everything immediately. It is about recognizing that your mind is responding normally to prolonged pressure. Awareness creates space inside the mind. That space is where recovery quietly begins. Mental fatigue often grows when the mind never fully switches off, even during moments that appear restful. You may sit quietly, lie down, or take a short break, yet thoughts keep moving in the background. Tasks, worries, and unfinished plans replay without effort or intention. This creates the feeling of rest, while the brain stays mentally active. Another reason the mind feels constantly tired is the pressure to stay mentally available. Messages, notifications, and expectations keep the brain on standby throughout the day. Even when nothing urgent is happening, the mind remains alert and watchful. This quiet readiness slowly drains mental energy over time. Mental exhaustion is also strengthened by constant decision-making. From small choices like what to respond or what to do next, to bigger responsibilities, the brain keeps adjusting and judging. Each decision feels minor on its own. Together, they create a heavy mental load that rarely gets released. When this tiredness continues for long periods, the mind begins to conserve energy automatically. Focus slows down, emotions feel slightly distant, and interest fades without clear reason. This is not weakness or loss of ability. It is the brain protecting itself from further strain. Many people respond to this state by pushing harder instead of slowing down. They increase effort, extend working hours, or force productivity. The mind keeps functioning, but clarity and calm slowly decrease. Over time, this imbalance becomes exhausting. Mental fatigue also changes how everyday problems are experienced. Small challenges feel heavier than before, and patience wears thin quickly. Situations that once felt manageable now feel stressful. This happens because mental energy is already low. Another hidden factor is the lack of true mental closure. Tasks may be completed, but thoughts about them continue running in the background. The mind does not register completion clearly. This keeps mental loops open longer than necessary. Over time, these open loops create a sense of mental clutter. Thoughts feel crowded, focus becomes scattered, and silence feels uncomfortable. The mind rarely feels empty or settled. This constant inner noise adds to overall exhaustion. Recovery does not begin with motivation or forcing positivity. It begins with noticing how much mental effort is spent each day without rest. Awareness gently reduces pressure. The mind starts to relax when it feels understood. As this part comes to a close, remember that mental tiredness is not something to fight against. It is something to listen to carefully and respectfully. When the mind feels tired all the time, it is asking for a different kind of rest. That understanding prepares the ground for real recovery. Chapter 2. How overthinking drains mental energy. Overthinking drains the mind by keeping it busy without giving it any clear direction or sense of completion. Thoughts keep moving from one idea to another, yet they rarely reach a satisfying end or conclusion. The mind feels active on the surface, but internally it remains restless and unsatisfied. One major way overthinking exhausts the brain is by constantly pulling attention into the future. The mind imagines what might go wrong, what needs preparation, or what should be avoided. These possibilities are treated like urgent problems, creating tension even when nothing is actually happening. Overthinking also keeps the mind locked in evaluation mode for long periods of time. You begin judging your actions, your words, and even your intentions again and again. This constant self-checking quietly consumes a large amount of mental energy. Another hidden drain is the habit of mentally rehearsing situations before they occur. You prepare conversations, predict reactions, and plan explanations that may never be needed. The mind stays alert as if something important is about to happen. When overthinking becomes a routine pattern, the mind slowly forgets how to rest naturally. Silence starts to feel uncomfortable instead of calming or safe. Empty moments are quickly filled with analysis and internal dialogue. Overthinking also affects emotional balance over time. Small worries feel heavier than they should, and neutral situations begin to feel slightly threatening. The mind reacts strongly because it is already tired. As mental energy continues to drop, the ability to interrupt overthinking becomes weaker. A tired mind struggles to redirect attention away from repetitive thoughts. This creates a cycle where thinking causes exhaustion and exhaustion strengthens thinking. The goal is not to stop thinking completely or force silence on the mind. It is to notice when thinking becomes repetitive and no longer useful. Awareness gently loosens the grip of overthinking without effort. Overthinking is not a personal weakness or a flaw in character. It often develops in people who care deeply, take responsibility, and want to avoid mistakes. When this is understood without judgment, self-blame softens and mental energy slowly begins to return. Overthinking also keeps the mind focused on control rather than real experience. The brain tries to manage outcomes before they happen, believing this will reduce discomfort and uncertainty. In reality, this constant need for control quietly increases tension and mental strain over time. Another way overthinking drains energy is by keeping attention divided throughout the day. Part of the mind stays in the present, while another part keeps analyzing something else. This split focus prevents deep rest and full engagement, leaving the mind feeling scattered and tired. Overthinking often grows stronger during periods of emotional uncertainty. When feelings are unclear or uncomfortable, the mind tries to explain them away through thought. Instead of processing emotions, it analyzes them endlessly, adding mental pressure. The mind also becomes tired when it searches for perfect answers. Overthinking pushes you to find the right response, the right choice, or the right explanation. Nothing ever feels fully resolved, which slowly drains mental energy. Another hidden cost of overthinking is delayed action and hesitation. The mind keeps preparing but avoids moving forward. This creates an inner sense of being stuck. Mental energy is spent without producing relief or progress. Overthinking also interferes with intuition and natural judgment. The more the mind analyzes, the less it trusts simple understanding. Decisions feel heavier and more complex than necessary, increasing fatigue. When overthinking becomes intense, the body also begins to feel its effects. Muscles stay slightly tense, breathing becomes shallow, and relaxation feels incomplete. The mind and body remain connected in a low-level stress response. A tired mind can even begin to fear its own thoughts. You may worry about thinking too much, which creates even more thinking. This self-awareness without calm turns into another exhausting loop. Learning to step back from overthinking begins with gently noticing its patterns. You do not need to fight or suppress thoughts to gain control. Simply seeing them clearly reduces their power. As this chapter comes to a close, remember that overthinking is not the enemy. It is a sign of a mind trying to protect you from uncertainty and discomfort. When protection turns into exhaustion, understanding becomes the solution. Chapter 3. How constant stimulation wears the mind down. The modern mind is rarely allowed to rest because it is constantly surrounded by stimulation from every direction throughout the day. Screens, sounds, notifications, and endless information keep pulling attention away before it has time to settle. Even moments that once felt quiet are now filled with mental activity. Constant stimulation keeps the brain in a low-level alert state for long periods of time without clear breaks. The mind stays ready to respond, react, or switch focus at any moment, even when nothing important is happening. This continuous readiness slowly drains mental energy without creating obvious warning signs. Many people believe stimulation helps them relax, but the mind experiences it very differently. Watching videos, scrolling feeds, or switching between apps still requires attention, processing, and decision-making. The brain remains active even when the body appears still. When stimulation becomes non-stop, the mind loses its natural rhythm of effort and recovery. There is no clear boundary between working and resting anymore. Mental activity stays constant instead of rising and falling naturally. Another effect of constant stimulation is a gradual loss of deep focus. The mind becomes trained to expect quick changes and instant rewards. Sustained attention begins to feel uncomfortable and demanding. This creates frustration and adds to mental fatigue. Stimulation also affects emotional balance in subtle ways. Rapid input leaves little space to process feelings fully or naturally. Emotions remain unfinished and unresolved beneath the surface. This adds a quiet emotional weight to mental tiredness. The brain also becomes less comfortable with silence over time. Quiet moments start to feel empty or slightly unsettling instead of peaceful. The mind reaches for stimulation automatically. This habit keeps mental tension alive even during rest. When stimulation replaces true rest, the mind never fully resets. Thoughts continue piling up instead of clearing on their own. Mental clarity becomes rare and short-lived. Exhaustion slowly becomes the default state. Reducing stimulation does not mean removing it completely from life. It means allowing the mind regular moments of simplicity, stillness, and reduced input. These moments signal safety to the nervous system. Mental energy begins to return gradually. Understanding the role of constant stimulation helps explain why the mind feels tired all the time. Exhaustion is often not about doing too much, but about receiving too much. When the mind is given space, it naturally remembers how to rest. That space becomes the foundation for clarity. Constant stimulation slowly trains the mind to seek novelty instead of depth, making attention jump restlessly from one thing to another without ever feeling complete or satisfied. The brain becomes used to frequent changes, quick rewards, and constant input, while losing its ability to stay with one experience calmly. Over time, this restless pattern creates a background tension that quietly drains mental energy throughout the day. When the mind becomes dependent on stimulation, even ordinary tasks begin to feel boring, tiring, or strangely uncomfortable. Simple activities no longer hold attention easily because the brain expects fast movement and continuous input. This expectation makes everyday life feel mentally demanding, even when very little effort is required. Another effect of constant stimulation is a reduced tolerance for slowness and stillness. Waiting, silence, or moments with nothing to engage with start to feel uneasy rather than peaceful. The mind urges you to fill every gap with activity, noise, or content, preventing the nervous system from settling down. Stimulation also interrupts the natural emotional processing cycle that helps the mind release tension. Feelings arise, but attention shifts away before they are fully understood or resolved. These unfinished emotions remain stored beneath the surface. Over time, they quietly add weight to mental fatigue. Under constant stimulation, the mind also becomes more reactive and sensitive. Small interruptions feel irritating, and patience wears thin faster than before. Emotional responses become sharper because the nervous system is already overstimulated. This heightened reactivity further drains mental strength. As overstimulation continues, the brain slowly forgets what real rest feels like. Even when time is available, the mind remains busy and alert. True mental quiet starts to feel unfamiliar, almost unreachable. Rest no longer refreshes the way it once did. Reducing stimulation must be intentional, gentle, and repeated over time. The mind needs consistent signals that it is safe to slow down without missing anything important. Short moments of reduced input gradually rebuild tolerance for calm. Energy returns slowly, not suddenly. Mental recovery improves when stimulation is balanced with simplicity and presence. Quiet walking, sitting without distraction, or slow breathing gives the mind space to settle naturally. These moments may seem small, but they restore mental clarity in powerful ways. As this chapter draws to a close, remember that mental tiredness often comes from receiving too much, not from doing too little. The human mind was never designed for constant stimulation. When it is given space and simplicity, it begins to heal on its own. That healing prepares the mind for deeper focus, stability, and calm. Chapter 4. Why emotional load exhausts the mind. Mental tiredness often deepens when emotions are carried silently without being acknowledged or expressed in healthy ways. The mind holds on to unresolved feelings like stress, disappointment, or pressure while continuing daily responsibilities as if nothing is wrong. Over time, this hidden emotional weight becomes one of the strongest causes of mental exhaustion. Emotional load increases when you constantly suppress what you feel in order to function, perform, or stay composed. The mind spends energy managing emotions instead of processing them naturally. This inner management work happens quietly, but it consumes a significant amount of mental strength. Many people believe ignoring emotions makes them go away, but the mind remembers what the body avoids. Feelings that are not processed remain active in the background, influencing thoughts and reactions. This constant background activity keeps the mind from fully resting. Emotional exhaustion also grows when you carry responsibility for too many things at once. Caring for others, meeting expectations, and holding yourself together all require emotional effort. When this effort is continuous, the mind rarely feels light or free. Mental energy slowly gets depleted. Another source of emotional load is the pressure to appear strong or unaffected. The mind works hard to maintain control while emotions remain unresolved underneath. This split between appearance and inner experience creates tension. That tension quietly drains mental clarity. Unprocessed emotions also affect how the mind interprets situations. Neutral moments start to feel heavier, and small challenges feel more intense than they should. Emotional weight changes perception without being obvious. This makes daily life feel mentally tiring. Over time, emotional load reduces the mind's ability to recover naturally. Even rest does not feel fully refreshing because emotions are still active internally. The mind remains alert, guarded, and slightly tense. True relaxation becomes difficult. Emotional recovery begins with awareness rather than force or judgment. Noticing what you feel without immediately reacting reduces inner resistance. This gentle attention allows emotions to move instead of staying stuck. As this chapter begins, remember that mental tiredness is not always caused by thinking too much. Often, it comes from feeling too much without release. When emotions are given space, the mind no longer has to carry them alone. That space slowly restores mental energy. Emotional load also increases when the mind constantly revisits feelings that were never fully processed or understood. You may move forward in life, yet certain emotions quietly follow you, waiting for attention. This silent carrying uses mental energy even when you are not consciously thinking about it. Another source of emotional exhaustion is unresolved inner conflict. Part of the mind wants rest, while another part demands performance, control, or perfection. This inner tension creates a continuous pull in opposite directions. Over time, the mind becomes tired from holding itself together. Emotional fatigue also grows when you rarely feel emotionally safe enough to slow down. The mind stays alert, ready to manage reactions or expectations from others. This alertness becomes a habit rather than a response to real danger. The nervous system remains active longer than necessary. When emotions are consistently postponed, the mind begins to treat them as threats instead of signals. Feelings are pushed aside quickly to avoid discomfort. This avoidance requires effort and attention. That effort adds to mental tiredness. Emotional load also affects memory and focus in subtle ways. The mind has less space to process new information clearly. Thoughts feel crowded, and attention slips more easily. Mental clarity becomes harder to maintain. Many people try to fix emotional exhaustion with logic alone. They think through problems instead of feeling through them. This creates understanding without release. The emotional weight remains, even when answers seem clear. Emotional relief does not come from dramatic changes or forced expression. It begins with allowing emotions to exist without immediate judgment or correction. This permission reduces internal resistance. The mind starts to feel lighter naturally. As emotional weight slowly lifts, mental energy begins to return in small but noticeable ways. Focus improves, reactions soften, and rest feels slightly more refreshing. These changes may feel subtle at first. Over time, they become stable. As this part comes to an end, remember that emotions are not obstacles to mental strength. They are signals asking for space, attention, and understanding. When the mind no longer has to hold them tightly, it can finally rest. That rest becomes the foundation for calm and clarity. Chapter 5. Why the mind never feels fully rested. Mental tiredness often continues because rest is misunderstood as stopping activity rather than releasing internal pressure. You may pause work or lie down physically, yet the mind keeps holding responsibilities, worries, and expectations. This kind of rest looks complete from the outside, but remains incomplete internally. The mind feels unrested when it never truly feels finished with anything. Tasks may be completed, but thoughts about them continue running quietly in the background. The brain does not register closure clearly. Without closure, mental recovery stays partial. Another reason the mind never feels fully rested is constant self-monitoring. You keep checking how you are doing, how you appear, and whether you are meeting expectations. This inner supervision consumes attention and energy. The mind stays alert even during rest. Mental fatigue also grows when rest is filled with mental stimulation. Watching content, scrolling feeds, or multitasking during breaks keeps the brain active. The mind never drops into a slower rhythm. Recovery remains shallow and temporary. The nervous system also plays a role in incomplete rest. When the body stays slightly tense, the mind remains cautious. Relaxation does not reach a deep level. This keeps mental tiredness alive. Another hidden factor is unresolved mental responsibility. Even when nothing is happening, the mind feels responsible for future tasks. This sense of obligation prevents full release. Mental rest requires feeling temporarily free from duty. The mind also struggles to rest when it feels behind or pressured by time. Thoughts about what should be done next interrupt stillness. Rest becomes rushed instead of restorative. This weakens its effect. True mental rest begins when the mind feels safe enough to stop managing everything. Safety signals allow attention to soften naturally. The brain shifts into recovery mode. Energy begins to rebuild quietly. Learning to rest mentally is a skill, not a personality trait. It develops through awareness, repetition, and gentleness. The mind relearns how to pause without fear. With time, rest becomes deeper and more effective. As this chapter begins, remember that mental tiredness is not always about lack of sleep. Often, it comes from never fully letting go. When the mind is allowed to release control, it discovers a deeper kind of rest. That rest restores clarity and calm from within. The mind also struggles to rest when it feels constantly observed or evaluated, even if that evaluation comes quietly from within. You may judge how productive your rest is, how relaxed you should feel, or whether you are wasting time. This inner monitoring keeps mental activity alive when it should be settling. Mental rest becomes difficult when the mind believes it must always stay prepared for what comes next. Even during silence, part of attention remains alert, ready to react if something changes. This readiness feels responsible, but quietly blocks deep relaxation. Another reason rest feels incomplete is the fear of falling behind in life. Thoughts about unfinished tasks, missed opportunities, or future pressure interrupt calm moments. The mind refuses to fully pause when it feels time is chasing it. The brain also carries habits formed during long periods of stress into moments meant for recovery. When alertness has lasted too long, it becomes the default setting. The nervous system forgets how to shift fully into rest. Calm begins to feel unfamiliar instead of natural. Mental tiredness continues when rest is approached with urgency instead of patience. You try to relax quickly, expecting immediate relief. This pressure turns rest into another task. True recovery requires allowing relaxation to arrive slowly. Rest also feels shallow when identity roles are never set down. You may continue carrying responsibility, care or expectation, even when alone. These roles keep the mind engaged. Letting them rest temporarily feels unsafe but is necessary. The mind needs repeated signals of safety to release control. Predictable routines and gentle environments help reduce vigilance. With repetition, the nervous system begins to soften. Mental energy slowly rebuilds. Mental recovery improves when rest includes permission rather than effort. Permission to stop managing, fixing, and planning for a while. This permission reduces inner resistance. The mind relaxes when it feels allowed to rest. As this chapter comes to a close, remember that mental rest is not about doing nothing perfectly. It is about letting go without fear or judgment. When the mind finally releases control, tiredness begins to lift naturally. That release prepares the mind for real clarity. Chapter 6. How lack of mental boundaries causes exhaustion. Mental exhaustion often begins when the mind no longer knows where one responsibility ends and another is supposed to stop. Thoughts continue moving across work, personal life, emotions and expectations without any clear separation or pause. This constant overlap keeps the mind engaged even when nothing actually requires attention. When mental boundaries are weak, the mind feels responsible at all times, even during moments meant for rest or recovery. Duties, conversations, and unfinished thoughts remain active in the background, quietly demanding attention. The brain stays alert because it never receives a clear signal that it is safe to disengage. Another source of exhaustion appears when the mind takes on responsibility beyond its natural limits. You may feel the need to think for others, solve their problems, or remain emotionally available without pause. This constant outward focus stretches mental energy thinner than it can sustain. Lack of boundaries also shows up internally, when worries and self-criticism enter moments meant for calm. The mind turns rest into reflection, reflection into pressure, and pressure into fatigue. Recovery becomes difficult because thinking never truly stops. Without mental boundaries, the mind struggles to distinguish what is important from what is merely present. Everything feels urgent, demanding, and mentally loud at the same time. Attention becomes scattered across too many thoughts, creating a constant sense of inner weight. Mental boundaries are also needed between thinking and feeling. When every emotion is immediately analyzed, judged, or questioned, feelings are never allowed to move naturally. Emotional experience turns into mental labor, adding to exhaustion. Lack of boundaries often affects sleep and quiet time most strongly. Thoughts spill into moments meant for slowing down, reflection, or rest. The body may lie still, but the mind continues working. Mental boundaries do not mean ignoring responsibility or avoiding care. They mean deciding when engagement pauses temporarily so recovery can happen. This pause allows the nervous system to reset without guilt. Many people fear that boundaries will reduce productivity or emotional connection. In reality, boundaries protect clarity, focus, and emotional balance. The mind functions better when it is not always engaged. Learning mental boundaries begins with awareness rather than force. You notice when engagement continues without purpose or necessity. That awareness creates choice, and choice restores balance. As this chapter continues, remember that mental exhaustion often comes from endless engagement rather than lack of ability. The mind needs clear edges to feel safe and stable. Boundaries provide those edges, and within them, calm slowly returns. When mental boundaries remain weak for a long time, the mind slowly begins to feel permanently exposed, as if it has no clear place where it can safely stop engaging and finally rest. Thoughts enter without permission, Responsibilities stay active longer than they should, and emotional demands overlap until everything feels mentally loud. This constant openness keeps the mind alert even in moments that are meant for recovery. The mind also becomes deeply tired when it never feels true permission to mentally clock out from responsibility. Even during personal time, a part of attention remains tied to duties, expectations, or unresolved matters that quietly demand awareness. This divided state prevents full recovery and slowly lowers mental energy. Another effect of weak boundaries is the gradual loss of inner silence, where moments that could feel calm are instead filled with planning, reviewing, or anticipating what comes next. The mind rarely experiences emptiness because it has learned to fill every space automatically. Without emptiness, true mental rest becomes almost impossible. Mental boundaries become even more important during emotional stress, when feelings are intense and demand attention. The mind tries to manage thoughts, emotions, and reactions all at once, believing control will bring relief. This constant management turns feeling into effort and adds to exhaustion. Over time, the mind begins to associate stillness with discomfort instead of safety. Quiet moments trigger thought activity rather than calm because the brain has learned to stay busy. This habit keeps mental fatigue alive even during rest. Boundaries also shape how the mind responds to other people's needs and expectations. Without limits, every request feels urgent and personal, even when it should not be. The mind absorbs pressure that does not belong to it, slowly draining strength. The absence of boundaries can also create resentment and inner tension that is hard to explain. You may feel overwhelmed without knowing exactly why, because the mind is carrying more than it was designed to hold. This hidden load affects mood, clarity, and patience. Rest becomes more effective only when the mind clearly knows where it is allowed to stop. Clear mental edges allow attention to release naturally without guilt or fear. The nervous system responds to this clarity by slowly rebuilding energy. Setting mental boundaries does not require dramatic changes or rigid rules. It begins with small decisions about when to engage and when to pause. These decisions protect mental space and restore balance over time. As this chapter settles, remember that boundaries are not walls meant to isolate you from life. They are signals of care that tell the mind it does not have to carry everything at once. When boundaries are respected, mental exhaustion loosens its grip and calm begins to return. Chapter 7. Why constant self-pressure drains mental strength. Constant self-pressure slowly exhausts the mind because it creates the feeling that you are never quite enough, no matter how much effort you put in. The mind stays focused on what should be improved, corrected, or achieved next, instead of acknowledging what is already being carried successfully. This ongoing inner demand keeps mental tension alive even during moments that appear calm. Self-pressure often comes from the belief that slowing down will lead to failure or disappointment. The mind pushes itself to stay alert, productive, and controlled at all times, fearing the consequences of rest. Over time, this pressure becomes internalized, meaning no external force is needed to keep the mind strained. The mind also becomes tired when expectations are constantly raised without space for recovery. Each achievement quickly turns into a new standard that must be maintained or exceeded. There is no mental pause between effort and demand. This cycle gradually drains mental strength. Self-pressure also changes how mistakes are experienced internally. Small errors feel larger than they are, and the mind revisits them repeatedly. Instead of learning and releasing, the mind holds on tightly. This holding consumes energy and increases fatigue. Another hidden effect of self-pressure is loss of emotional softness. The mind becomes rigid in its standards and impatient with natural human limits. Compassion toward oneself slowly fades. Mental effort increases as kindness decreases. When self-pressure is constant, rest begins to feel unearned. The mind believes it must justify relaxation through productivity. Even during rest, thoughts about doing more remain active. Recovery stays incomplete. Self-pressure also narrows mental focus. Attention becomes centered on performance rather than experience. Life feels like a checklist instead of a flow. This narrow focus intensifies mental exhaustion. Over time, the mind forgets how to exist without evaluating itself. Thoughts are measured, compared, and judged continuously. Silence becomes uncomfortable because it removes distraction from self-evaluation. Mental energy is consumed internally. Reducing self-pressure does not mean lowering standards or losing discipline. It means allowing space between effort and worth. This space lets the mind breathe without fear. Mental strength begins to rebuild naturally. As this chapter begins, remember that mental exhaustion is often fueled by how hard you push yourself internally. The mind does not recover through pressure, but through permission. When self-pressure softens, clarity and calm slowly return. Self-pressure also keeps the mind in a constant state of comparison, where progress is measured against imagined standards rather than real capacity or context. The mind quietly asks whether you are doing enough, being enough, or moving fast enough, even when no one else is demanding more. This internal comparison creates tension that slowly wears down mental strength. Another way self-pressure drains energy is by removing the feeling of completion from everyday effort. Tasks are finished, but satisfaction never arrives because the mind immediately looks ahead to what remains undone. This lack of closure keeps mental effort active far longer than necessary. Self-pressure often disguises itself as responsibility or discipline, making it difficult to recognize as a source of exhaustion. The mind believes that relaxing standards will lead to loss or failure. Because of this belief, pressure is maintained even when it causes harm. When self-pressure is constant, the mind becomes less tolerant of natural pauses. Moments of rest feel uncomfortable or undeserved, as if something important is being neglected. This discomfort pulls the mind back into effort before recovery can begin. The mind also loses emotional balance under continuous self-pressure. Feelings of guilt, impatience, or frustration appear more quickly and linger longer than they should. These emotions add another layer of mental strain. Over time, self-pressure reduces the mind's ability to feel ease. Even enjoyable moments are overshadowed by the sense that something more should be done. Pleasure becomes conditional instead of natural. Self-pressure also weakens trust in one's own pace. The mind ignores signals of fatigue or overload in order to maintain control. This resistance deepens exhaustion instead of preventing it. Letting go of self-pressure does not mean abandoning goals or lowering care. It means allowing effort to exist without constant judgment or urgency. This shift restores balance between striving and resting. As self-pressure softens, the mind begins to experience space between action and worth. Effort no longer feels like proof of value. Mental energy starts returning through relief rather than force. As this chapter settles, remember that strength is not built through endless self-demand. The mind grows resilient when it is allowed to move, pause, and recover naturally. When pressure loosens, clarity and confidence rise quietly in its place. Chapter 8. How lack of meaningful rest keeps the mind tired. When rest lacks depth and intention, the mind never truly resets, even if time is taken away from work or responsibility. Pauses filled with distraction, noise, or constant input may look like rest, but internally they keep the mind active and alert. This kind of surface rest delays recovery and allows fatigue to quietly build. Meaningful rest requires more than stopping activity because the mind also needs permission to release control and expectation. When rest is rushed or treated as something to quickly finish, the nervous system remains tense. Without a sense of safety, mental recovery stays incomplete. The mind also remains tired when rest is constantly interrupted by thought. Even during quiet moments, planning, reviewing, or anticipating the next task pulls attention back into effort. These interruptions prevent the mind from entering a slower, restorative rhythm. Over time, rest loses its healing effect. Another reason rest feels ineffective is the absence of emotional disengagement. You may step away physically, but emotional responsibility stays active. The mind continues carrying concern, pressure, or vigilance. This emotional carry blocks deep relaxation. Lack of meaningful rest also blurs the boundary between effort and recovery. When both feel similar, the mind cannot tell when it is allowed to soften. This confusion keeps mental tension alive. Energy drains even during supposed breaks. The mind also struggles when rest is measured by productivity rather than restoration. You may judge rest by how useful it was instead of how calming it felt. This evaluation keeps the mind working. True rest requires no performance. Over time, the absence of deep rest reduces the mind's resilience. Stress feels heavier, focus weakens, and emotional balance becomes harder to maintain. The mind reacts faster and recovers slower. Fatigue becomes persistent. Meaningful rest begins when the mind is allowed to be quiet without purpose. Silence, simplicity, and stillness send signals of safety. These signals help the nervous system downshift naturally. Creating meaningful rest does not require long breaks or dramatic changes. Small, intentional pauses with reduced input are enough to begin recovery. Consistency matters more than duration. As this chapter begins, remember that mental tiredness often comes from resting without truly resting. The mind heals when rest feels safe, slow, and undemanding. When meaningful rest returns, clarity and energy follow naturally. Meaningful rest also disappears when the mind treats stillness as wasted time rather than necessary recovery, which causes attention to stay restless even during pauses. The mind looks for stimulation, distraction, or mental activity to justify stopping. This habit keeps the nervous system active when it should be slowing down. Another reason rest fails to restore energy is the fear of falling behind while doing nothing. The mind quietly worries that slowing down will create problems later. This fear keeps mental tension alive even in calm environments. Rest also becomes ineffective when it is filled with unconscious effort. You may relax physically, but the mind continues organizing thoughts, planning ahead, or reviewing the past. This hidden effort prevents the mind from dropping into a deeper state of ease. The mind also struggles when rest is not protected from interruption. Frequent checking, reacting, or shifting attention breaks recovery before it begins. Each interruption pulls the mind back into alert mode. Energy never fully rebuilds. When meaningful rest is missing, emotional sensitivity increases over time. Small stresses feel heavier, and patience wears thin quickly. The mind reacts faster because it has not been replenished. Another hidden effect of poor rest is the loss of mental creativity. The mind becomes focused only on survival and completion. Fresh ideas feel distant and unreachable. Mental fatigue replaces curiosity. True rest allows the mind to move without direction or pressure. Thoughts rise and fall naturally without needing correction or control. This freedom helps the nervous system reset. Rest also restores trust in the body's natural rhythm. When rest is slow and uninterrupted, the mind learns that nothing bad happens when it pauses. This learning reduces anxiety around slowing down. Recovery deepens when rest includes emotional permission. You allow yourself to pause without guilt or justification. This permission releases inner resistance. As this chapter settles, remember that rest is not something to earn through effort. It is a requirement, not a reward. When rest becomes meaningful again, the mind slowly regains strength, balance, and clarity. Chapter 9. How constant mental noise prevents clarity. Mental clarity becomes difficult when the mind is surrounded by constant internal noise that never fully settles or quiets down. Thoughts overlap, inner commentary continues, and attention rarely rests on one thing without interruption. This steady background noise keeps the mind busy even when nothing urgent is happening. Mental noise often grows from unfinished thoughts that remain open in the background of awareness. Decisions, worries, and unresolved questions continue circulating without closure. The mind stays occupied managing this noise instead of resting or focusing clearly. Another source of mental noise is the habit of constant internal narration. The mind explains, judges, and reacts to every experience internally. This commentary feels automatic and helpful, but it adds continuous mental movement. Over time, this movement becomes exhausting. Mental noise also increases when silence feels uncomfortable. Quiet moments trigger thoughts instead of calm. The mind fills space quickly to avoid stillness. This habit prevents clarity from forming naturally. When mental noise dominates, focus becomes shallow and easily disturbed. Attention jumps quickly from one idea to another. Deep thinking feels difficult and effortful. Mental energy drains faster in this scattered state. Emotional noise also contributes to mental clutter. Unexpressed feelings remain active beneath the surface. They influence thoughts without being clearly recognized. This emotional activity adds to internal noise. The mind becomes tired when it never experiences true quiet. Even rest is filled with thinking. Without moments of mental stillness, clarity has no space to appear. Fatigue slowly builds. Reducing mental noise does not require forcing silence. It begins with noticing when the mind is adding unnecessary commentary. Awareness creates space between thought and attention. This space allows noise to soften naturally. Clarity improves when the mind experiences moments without demand. Stillness signals safety to the nervous system. With safety, mental activity slows. Energy begins to restore. As this chapter begins, remember that mental tiredness is often the result of constant internal sound rather than effort. The mind needs quiet as much as it needs rest. When noise reduces, clarity emerges on its own. That clarity supports calm and focus. Constant mental noise prevents the mind from settling because attention keeps shifting between thoughts, memories, reactions, and imagined outcomes without ever finding a stable point of rest. Inner commentary continues even when nothing needs to be processed, creating a sense of movement without progress. This continuous mental activity quietly replaces clarity with fatigue and makes rest feel incomplete. When the mind stays filled with noise, even simple moments begin to feel mentally demanding instead of neutral or light. Attention splits between what is happening and what the mind is saying about it at the same time. This divided awareness consumes energy without providing understanding or relief. Mental noise often strengthens when silence feels uncomfortable rather than safe. Quiet moments create space, and space brings awareness closer to thoughts and emotions that were previously ignored. To avoid this awareness, the mind fills silence with thinking. Another strong source of mental noise is the habit of constantly explaining experiences internally. The mind analyzes, judges, and categorizes events automatically instead of allowing them to pass naturally. This non-stop narration adds unnecessary layers of thinking that slowly exhaust mental energy. Mental noise also interferes with emotional clarity by mixing feeling with interpretation. Emotions are immediately explained instead of experienced, which prevents natural release. This interference keeps emotional tension active in the background. When mental noise becomes constant, the mind loses its natural rhythm between effort and rest. There is no clear transition into quiet because thinking never truly slows. Recovery remains shallow and temporary. Decision-making also becomes harder under mental noise because attention is already overloaded. Choices feel heavier than they should, even when they are simple. Doubt increases as mental fatigue grows. Reducing mental noise begins when fewer thoughts are treated as urgent or important. Not every idea needs attention, response, or belief. This selective awareness creates inner space. Quiet does not mean emptiness or loss of control for the mind. It means attention is no longer reacting to everything it produces. In this quiet, mental energy begins to return. As this chapter settles, remember that clarity does not come from thinking harder. It appears naturally when internal noise softens and attention is allowed to rest. A quieter mind is not weaker. It is finally able to breathe. Chapter 10. How lack of mental closure keeps the mind tired. The mind feels constantly tired when it rarely experiences a sense of completion, even after tasks appear to be finished on the surface. Thoughts about what was done, what could have been better, or what still remains keep circulating quietly in the background. Without mental closure, effort continues long after action has ended. Mental closure is missing when the mind moves from one responsibility to another without pausing to register completion. Tasks end physically, but mentally they remain open and unfinished. This open loop state keeps attention partially engaged and drains mental energy. Another reason closure is difficult is the habit of immediately shifting focus to the next concern. The mind does not allow itself a moment to settle or release what has passed. This constant forward pull prevents mental rest from forming naturally. Lack of closure also affects emotional processing. Feelings connected to experiences are left unresolved when attention moves on too quickly. These emotions remain active beneath awareness. Over time, they add to mental fatigue. The mind also struggles with closure when expectations are unclear or constantly changing. You may complete something, yet feel it was never enough. Satisfaction is delayed or denied. This keeps the mind tense and unsatisfied. Mental tiredness increases when closure is replaced by self-evaluation. Instead of releasing an experience, the mind reviews and judges it repeatedly. This review feels productive, but consumes energy. The mind remains busy instead of resting. Closure also becomes difficult when the mind fears slowing down. Pausing feels risky, as if something important might be missed. This fear keeps mental momentum going unnecessarily. Rest feels unsafe. Healthy mental closure requires allowing experiences to end internally. The mind needs permission to release attention without immediately replacing it. This release creates space. Space allows recovery. Closure does not require perfection or complete certainty. It requires acceptance that something is finished for now. This acceptance reduces inner pressure. Mental energy begins to return quietly. As this chapter begins, remember that tiredness often comes from carrying unfinished mental weight. When the mind learns to close loops gently, effort finally ends where it should. With closure, clarity and calm slowly return. As this audiobook reaches its final moments, understand that mental tiredness was never a sign of weakness, failure, or lack of ability, but a message asking for space and gentler awareness. Every layer of exhaustion you explored was not something to fix aggressively, but something to notice with patience and honesty. When the mind feels heard instead of pushed, it naturally begins to soften its grip. You were never meant to hold every thought open, every emotion active, or every responsibility unfinished inside your mind. Closure comes when attention is allowed to rest, not when answers are forced into place. In letting go of constant mental work, the mind discovers relief without effort. Clarity does not arrive suddenly or dramatically. It arrives quietly when pressure reduces and control loosens. The mind settles not because it was commanded to do so, but because it finally feels safe enough to pause. In that pause, mental strength begins to rebuild naturally. You do not need to carry everything you learned forward consciously for it to matter. Awareness continues working beneath the surface long after listening ends. Even now, the mind is already adjusting in small, unseen ways. Some days the mind will feel light, and some days it will feel heavy again, and neither means you have gone backward. Mental calm is not a destination to reach, but a rhythm you return to when needed. Knowing this removes fear from tiredness. As you step away from this audiobook, allow your thoughts to slow without direction, and your attention to rest without purpose. Let silence exist without filling it, and let the mind remain open rather than alert. In this quiet space, rest becomes possible. There is nothing left to solve, improve, or understand right now. The mind does not need another task, another thought, or another answer in this moment. For now, let the mind rest, and let clarity return in its own time.